Very proud to have four Dahdaleh Institute graduate students showcase their global health research and present the progress that they've made so far in their research journeys. But before we start the seminar, as is our usual practice, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous land that we're on. As this is a hybrid event, some guests are on different territories, and most especially our virtual guests. And please take the time to give thanks and respect to the actual land on which you are currently living and working. And so today, here at York University campus in Toronto, we are situated on the traditional territorial area known as Takaronto, and we acknowledge its current treaty holders, who are the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also acknowledge that this is the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and of course the Métis. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. And with that land acknowledgement, I'd like to just say that we're really, really excited to feature Eric Asempah, Hilary Birch, Yuliya Chorna, and Nilanjana Ganguli, who are all graduate scholars at today's symposium. We'd also like to acknowledge all members of the graduate scholars community here at the Institute for the work that they have been doing and are doing and will continue to do through their graduate careers. We have many, many people, graduate students that are scholars here at the Institute: Abraham, Eunice, Isaac, Lynn, Tino, Sarah, Mike DeSante, Raphael, who's online here, and then also many incoming new students this year, graduate students: Alexis, Noam, Roxanne, and Sukriti, just to name the majority. There's one or two others that I somehow have forgotten, but that's our cohort. We have quite a good, strong, and vibrant cohort of people. And for me, as director of the Institute, it's a real pleasure to welcome and to collaborate and support each of the students and all of the faculty that are fellows here at the Institute very much enjoy that privilege. And I will say that, as a professor, Roger is here now, and he may agree or disagree, but I think he'll agree. Probably the most exciting thing that you can do as a professor is work with graduate students who are really, really driven, really, really curious, and really, really committed to generating new knowledge. There are many roles as a professor, but there are few things that are more gratifying than being with a graduate student and working with a graduate student and seeing them grow in their ability to use their curiosity to genuinely create new knowledge that genuinely contributes to making this a better world. And that's very much my joy, if you will, in being director here at the Institute. And with that said, let's begin by introducing our four graduate students who are going to be presenting their work today. Eric Asempah is a PhD candidate in the School of Health Policy and Management and Faculty of Health. And his research focuses on HPV, or human papillomavirus, vaccination policy, and increasing accessibility of HPV vaccines, specifically, but I also think generally, in low and middle income countries. Next is Hilary Birch, and Hilary is a PhD student in environmental studies in the Faculty of Environment and Urban Change. And her research explores how projects on global health intersect with processes of urbanization. And her particular interest is water and water quality, and how urbanization affects water quality. And third is Yuliya Chorna, and Yuliya is a PhD student in social anthropology in the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies, and her research focuses on tuberculosis and HIV, and she will certainly present it herself, but on networks, regionally and globally, and how these networks of researchers and engaged practitioners actually shape our view of HIV and our view specifically of tuberculosis, and therefore our approach to tuberculosis. And last but not least is Nilanjana Ganguli. And Nell is a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change, and her research focuses on the gendered aspects of adaptation strategies to climate change. And she is working with me and a number of other faculty here at York on exploring gendered aspects and gendered tools for modeling the health impacts of climate change in Malawi. Now, the four of you are, I mean, just even from my very brief description, these are incredible areas of focus, and you can see that the Institute is very committed to transdisciplinarity, but with a critical problem-solving lens for global health priorities around planetary health, global health and humanitarianism, and global health foresighting. And among our other graduate students, there's a whole range of incredible research that is formulated under that critical problem-solving perspective. And the other key thing that is critical for us is that we're committed to effectiveness, so critical problem-solving with tools and outcomes that are effective. They have to actually work. And then the second is equity. They have to advance equity in a very significant and practical manner. And then the third sort of principle, if you will, or value that we really highlight is excellence. We really are committed to excellence in research, excellence in policy and practice. And I think we're very, very fortunate to have a community of faculty that are equally committed and that are attracting the kind of grad students that you represent here in the room and also online. Now, before I give the floor to our first graduate scholar, let me just review our format very quickly. So 1.5 hour event. We will end promptly at 12:30 because, as we all know, and the real reason everybody is here is there's a Christmas party. So we're going to end promptly at 12:30. And each of our scholars will have 10 minutes to present their ideas and their work and their progress to date. And at about 11:50-ish, I'll ask and invite people to discussion and comment. We're going to conclude promptly at 12:30, just so that everyone is aware. For those who are online, please do recognize that this session is being recorded, and please mute your microphone unless you're asking questions or engaged in discussion. And you can use the quote-unquote raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand if you wish. And you can also use the chat function. But I would encourage people to speak as opposed to write, although certainly you can write in the chat box if you wish. And so I'm going to ask Eric Asempah to begin. And Eric, we can pull up Eric's slides. Eric's presentation is titled Imperatives for a Nationwide HPV or Human Papillomavirus Vaccine Program, a foremost approach to cervical cancer prevention in Ghana. So Eric.
Thank you very much, James, for the introduction. So once again, my name is Eric Asempah.
Could you just move the microphone closer to you, just so the people on?
Yeah. I hope I can be heard from here. So as I said, my name is Eric Asempah, and the study area is human papillomavirus vaccination program in Ghana. And the rationale for this particular study is because there is a higher cervical cancer cases in Ghana. While that is the case, there is very little governmental attention. So my study was to look at why that is the case and then what the general public outlook is on this issue. So the objective is to understand the policy environment in the country, and then also the policy instruments in the country and how these policy instruments tend to be engaged to make or come towards health equity, and then also be able to make this out to see whether it makes any sense when it comes to health as a human right. And then the scope was to look at governmental priority setting and then how the government make effort to make life-saving vaccines available to the citizens. So that has been the objectives and then the scope for the research. And the reason for cervical cancer is because currently it is the fourth common cancer among women globally, with nearly 600,000 case incidences, with over 300,000 deaths globally. So there are over 740 deaths daily from cervical cancer. And while that is the case, 85% of these mortality cases are happening in the global south or low middle income countries. Ghana currently has cervical cancer as the most prevalent cancer among women. And then also, while that is the case, also we do have cervical cancer mortality being the highest, even though it is not the most prevalent. Breast cancer is the most prevalent, but the mortality for breast cancer is much less than that of cervical cancer. So these are some of the rationale. But even with that, there is a conversation around the fact that the numbers are still an underestimation because the records is coming from the urban areas, whereas the hinterlands are not properly, the data is not properly recorded, but those are the areas where most cervical cancer cases are being reported. The good news is we do have vaccination for cervical cancer prevention, and it is one of the most preventable cancers. So there is no reason why something that can be easily prevented we shouldn't be looking at. Currently, Merck does have a Gardasil now, which has been promoted to Gardasil now 9, that is targeting 9 strains of HPV. The HPV strains, because the cervical cancer tends to be predominantly caused by the high-risk human papillomaviruses. So the Gardasil 9 tends to target 9 strains of it. The previous one was targeting only 4. And Cervarix, which is also manufactured by GSK, is also one of the prophylactic vaccines targeting cervical cancer. And Sicolin, which is a Chinese-made vaccine, is also in the market now, being developed by Xiamen University and then Innovax Biotechnology. The problem is it is still not pre-qualified by WHO, so it is only available in China right now. But it is hoped that this is going to be a game changer, since the price value for it is going to be far cheaper for low-income countries to buy. So we are hoping for this to be pre-qualified to be made accessible to low-middle-income countries. Even though HPV is still available, HPV vaccine is very available on the market space. Only 25% of the low-income countries have HPV vaccination program, as part of their immunization program. Whereas the high-income countries, which have less mortality rate and less incidence rates, have 85% of these OECD nations, or the high-income countries having 85% of of HPV vaccine program as part of their immunization program. So there is a big disparity, and this is something that we need to look at to bridge that gap. The WHO is targeting to bring this to an eradication stage by having 4 cases per 1,000 women per year by 2030. The problem is the 1970-90 rule seems not to be possible looking at the current situation of cervical cancer cases rising. So there has to be a different approach or a much more stronger push for the developing nations to have a strategy to make sure these targets by the WHO can be achieved. But the 2030 is very debatable that they will be able to achieve that. For my research, I started data collection from December 21st, 2021 to April 8th, 2022. I used a mixed method. I interviewed key stakeholders and then also conducted surveys. And out of the surveys, I was able to manipulate 201 data from the surveys that I had. And then I used SPSS and NVivo to manipulate the data that I had. And the theoretical framework that I adopted was the actor network. That is how I incorporated all the material and immaterial actors that were in play to understand the situation. So that is how I actually conducted it. I got my data and then manipulated my data. So the data that I actually got from the study for the surveys, I was getting over 26-year-olds completing the data, and majority of these were university educated. So they had some pre-knowledge or some kind of foreknowledge of HPV or cervical cancer. Previous research that has been done showed that even university students and nursing college students did not have any idea at all what HPV even was. So this study actually is kind of shifting the mindset. And also it is because there has been a pilot project before, so that might have pre-informed people, and also the media and other news outlets is in a way trying to push this agenda for it, so people are getting the knowledge of it. But this is just much more in the urban areas. I'm going to just assume from my end that the hinterlands or the villages are not going to have this kind of knowledge, or people who don't have enough education and not to know what HPV is or what even cervical cancer is. So more work needs to be done there. And the other good thing which I have marked as a window of opportunity is majority of the people who were interviewed indicated debating sex after age 17. So that is a very good window for HPV vaccine, which is prophylactic, to be administered. That is an opportunity for the country to look at. Previous indication and also research conducted by the Institute for the International Agency for Cancer Research have also indicated the same data. So this is very consistent with their outcome. So the Ghana does have a good window to capture at this point. On the policy side, when it comes to government willingness and then government resource allocations and all that, most of the respondents think that the willingness on the part of the government is not really forthcoming. And then, however, they believe government does have the resource to get this going, but maybe the government is not really willing to do that. Public education seems to be high on the fact that the government needs to educate the public much more on cervical cancer and then HPV related cases. So that is an area. Priority setting seems to be very low, and this is coming from the public, and then also, mainly coming from the public, that cervical cancer priority setting is very low on this front. One interesting thing that came up from the interview is the fact that it's not that Ghana doesn't have an approach to deal with this particular case. The problem is that there is an implementation gap, and this particular finding, that is the exact wording from this interview individual. He stated that, I'm just going to pick from a section. He said that we know who to screen, we know who to vaccinate. They are all in the policy, but it has never been implemented because we blame it on the lack of funds. So the country does know what to do. However, it does kind of deviate from the purpose of policy or any document that actually instructs vaccination. So, and also the lack of priority on cervical cancer as opposed to breast cancer. Just last week, there was a senior person advocating for breast cancer facilitation in primary school, whereas cervical cancer is always on the back bench burner. So this is something that really needs to be pushed forward. So the highlights from the study is that Ghana does have a stable policy process, but however, there's a lack of funds. Immunization program is in place. There's a resource constraint, and the good thing is awareness of cervical cancer is increasing, and the window of opportunity of girls under 14 years not debuting sex is something the country can take advantage of. One thing that came up from the study too was that currently there's no evidence Ghana has uses aid as opposed to some other countries like Rwanda, where they adopted or use aid to get vaccines to expand their HPV vaccination program. So those are opportunities that the country can take advantage of. So on a nutshell, I kind of put this table together to show some of the issues at play and opportunities that the country can actually look at, and then how all these factors interplay to or leading to the no international HPV vaccination. The low priority setting, low political will, poor program implementation tracking, and then also there's poor policy throttle. That is, there's a policy inertia. So when the policy is created, there's that inertia whether to go or not to go. So those are still constraints that prevent the country from making any headway. The success drivers are the country does have good policy documents drafting. It always does have that. And then the government or governance system is also relatively stable. So these are all tools or areas of opportunity the country can take advantage of, and then build a national HPV vaccination program. I'm still developing this. It's not completed yet, and I think that this could be a tool to actually be used by the country and also other low-income countries to track how they execute any form of policy. So when you look at Ghana, between the intervention coverage all the way to health policy implementation, that cycle is never properly implemented. So we get stuck just even around the political environment, and then the policy just revolves in that space. It doesn't really go across the intervention in place stage. So when this kind of policy or framework is in place, it is very easy for governments or institutions to really know where their policies or their programs that they have in place is and where there's a drag. They really, are. So technically, this is where I am at, and I believe that if there are questions you can ask, or maybe you after the whole program, we can talk about it.
That's great. Thank you so much. I have a long list of questions. So.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, I think that's the last one. That is the last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next presenter will be Hilary Birch. And Hilary is going to present using quality to see the body and health in clothing political ecology. So over to you.
Okay. Am I okay on the Zoom? You can hear me?
We're going to put the.
Should I move the phone? Oh, perfect. Just put so many screens.
There.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Okay. Yes. So I'm excited to share my work. And as context, I am in the comprehensive stage of my program, so I don't have any results. You're going to have to come back to me in a few years. But I do look forward to sharing some very early theorizing I've been doing over the past couple months around in urban political ecology, water quality, and global health. And I hope to be able to carry forward as a scholar in planetary health here at the Institute. So, to begin, I just want to very broadly sketch out why I'm interested in issues of water quality. I was in Monrovia, Liberia in early 2020, researching the urban governance of Ebola. And when I was there, I was often thinking about water. Water was an essential component of efforts to control the virus in dense informal settlements. You see the image here of people washing their hands. These tap stands became essential infrastructures to control the disease. And because I was there in early 2020, I was also there just as COVID arrived in the city by chance. And all of a sudden, as I was making my way around the city, I was often having to encounter this type of infrastructure, washing my hands as I entered government buildings, washing my hands even when I was in a public market. So the power of water to kind of protect health is very clear to me. On the other side, I was also having to navigate the challenge of water in the city daily. So I had the great privilege of accessing bottled water. I could drink clean water to stay healthy, but many people in Monrovia don't have this opportunity and have to deal with the burden of disease that's associated with water quality like this. This is an image from the formal settlement of West Point, which is right in the middle of Monrovia. So on the one hand, I was thinking about how water was protecting health, and on the other hand, water was also taking away health in the city. So from my time in Monrovia to my studies here at York, I'm really interested in this question of how we can better deliver safely managed water, sanitation, and hygiene services in cities for communities that are left aside. And this is a statement from the Lancet Commission on Water, Sanitation, Hygiene, and Health from last year, where they call attention to this challenge. Particularly, they critique the continued pursuit of low-cost household interventions in the face of their growing evidence of their insufficiencies. And they also suggest that this particular scale of intervention and type of intervention distracts politically from the central challenge of building national systems of delivering universal access to safely managed services. And I think this is an inherently political question that I'm interested in exploring in my PhD. And I think asking questions about water quality and who has access to what type of water in the city, how water is produced for who, helps us perhaps understand this significant challenge of accessing services at the urban level. So I have a background in political science, and I found a very natural home in urban political ecology as my first comprehensive. So that's what I did for the past couple months. I'm going to talk to you about that now. And the reason I found UPE such a productive space to think about urban water quality is because of the essential foundation of the field is that there's a co-constitution and interdependence between the ecological and the urban. So the city isn't separate from nature, society is not separate from nature, but these are kind of co-constituted elements, and there's a dialectic approach to understanding how we are situated in urban space. So Harvey here, classic, he talks about how all ecological projects are political and economic projects. So the building of a dam isn't just an ecological project, it's also a political and an economic project. Vice versa with, say, the construction of a industrial plant in the periphery of a city, that's an economic project, it's a political project, and it's an ecological project. So it helps us kind of bring together these seemingly divergent pieces into one frame. But as I was going through the literature, which is innovative and exciting, I was reading about water and I was realizing that in the theorizing, water is often treated as a static but fluid material that's kind of brought into the city. It's made productive for our own reproduction and for production more generally. And then it's kind of conceptualized as like moving out of the city. It's kind of left the circulation and it kind of takes waste along with it. But what I found, especially coming from a background interested in health, was that this neglects important questions about water's materiality, water's quality, and how humans and our bodies are situated within these flows of water and waste in a city. And I think this is particularly important right now for a number of reasons. The most obvious, perhaps to everyone here, is that there's an unequal distribution of material burdens and exposure to illness and disease in cities. So this is across cities, so global north cities, global south cities, but also inside of cities. So certain communities are exposed to more disease, exposed to more pollution than others. We continue to use nature as a sink where we dump our material excesses, and we're filling waste frontiers around the world. Oftentimes these are in peripheral spaces, peripheral communities, and peripheral bodies in some sense. And then we have human bodies are themselves used as sites where pollution can be dumped and deposited, and this isn't evenly distributed. Some bodies are made more polluted and more sick than others. And I think water quality in particular, especially my interest in global health, kind of at the confluence of urban studies, offers a lot of exciting spaces to bring global health in conversation with UPE, urban political ecology, because water is a flow resource that has really significant externalities that are both public health related and environmental. So at the same time as it affects our bodies, water's quality affects what's out there. And I think that's a really interesting and innovative frame for bringing UPE in conversation with global health a bit more closely. And it brings us perhaps towards new conversations in planetary health about humans' relationships with nature. So I don't have time to go through what my literature review was in its totality. It was very ambling and kind of like far too big and not as focused, but I think there are three pieces here that are helpful to bring into conversation with global health research. One is how a view towards water quality and UPE forces us to kind of trouble our understanding of human agency in the constitution of the natural environment. So I have a few examples here about how a view towards water quality might make us think differently about our relationship to nature. There are the assumptions that underpin the science of pollution, such as the assimilative capacity of water bodies, so how much pollution we can put into a river before we can have negative effects. Attention to quality might trouble how we understand this in relation to human bodies and how this is distributed. The cocktail effect, which I think is interesting, this idea that when we release chemicals into nature, into water, it has additive effects, multiplicative effects with hormones that are temporally displaced. So we can't actually necessarily anticipate the effects in the longer term or in the immediate as well as we might want to. And then antimicrobial resistance. Our releasing of antibiotics into water has effects that we are just now trying to understand and bring into control in some sense. So that's human agency. I think water quality in UPE also forces us within UPE as a field to think differently about bodies and human bodies within broader urban metabolism. So this is how the body is embedded in socio-political, socio-ecological processes, material circulations. So these circulations both change water's quality and change our bodies. The most obvious example might be the example of Flint, Michigan, where the neoliberal austerity politics combined with water, racial capitalism, and objection in the experience of toxicity and ill health. And this is differently distributed. Different bodies are distributed in different circulations that produce disease. And lastly, I think it makes us think differently about infrastructure. When we think about water quality as being produced by heterogeneous infrastructures in global south cities, we have to think differently about how water quality isn't necessarily the product of kind of closed circuits and closed networks from how we might see a city in the global north. Cities in the global south are products of colonial legacies of urban planning that were segregationist and racist. So water quality isn't necessarily produced through kind of a closed loop of water moving in or water moving out, but there's a multiplying effect over multiple infrastructures that we as actors in global health play a part in as well. So that's it. Those are the three key takeaways I think are interesting for this conversation in this space. My next steps for my research, I completed the Dahdaleh Humanitarian Water Engineering Intensive course recently. I would recommend for anyone interested in water. I learned way more about water quality than I had before. I'm doing my second comprehensive now, which is water, sanitation, and disease control, the production of drinking water in southern cities. So it's a much more empirical comprehensive and drawing on from my engineering course that I just took. I have a third comprehensive, which is about governance theory a little more broadly. And then I'm coming back and I'm going to make this all concrete somehow in my dissertation proposal. So hopefully next year I can chat with you about that in a bit more detail. But that's it. So yeah, I look forward to talking to you.
Lots of questions.
Great.
Most important one, what's your dissertation going to be on? Don't answer.
Okay, I was like, oh my God. I leave now.
Our next presenter is Yuliya Chorna. And Yuliya is going to present under the title Global Tuberculosis Response in the context of the 2023 UN General Assembly high-level meeting on you're ready.
Hello, everyone. As already James mentioned in his introduction, I'm a first-year doctoral student in social anthropology, and my focus is on the medical anthropology. I have been working for more than 10 years in Eastern Europe and Central Asia and Ukraine on TB and on tuberculosis and HIV/AIDS, including with Tuberculosis Europe Coalition, which is a civil society and affected community network active in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Now I started studies this year, but I continue collaboration with the WHO Regional Office for Europe, Ministry of Health, National TB programs, and civil society and community networks in Ukraine and the region. And I also continue serving on several advisory bodies, including the Civil Society Task Force on Tuberculosis hosted by WHO Global TB Program. So what about tuberculosis? As I shared in my professional background, and a sense of being part of the global community concerned with alleviating suffering from tuberculosis, I aim to contribute to a social science research to address global tuberculosis epidemics. Here on the slides, you see the pictures from the most recent WHO Global TB report, which was just a couple of months released. And despite tuberculosis is often perceived as a disease of the past, and moreover, as a disease of others from elsewhere, worldwide tuberculosis is still a second infectious killer after COVID-19, and it's even more in their impact of death toll as HIV/AIDS. So despite tuberculosis is preventable and curable, statistic at the site is gloom, and it has been worsened for the couple of years in the light of impact of COVID-19 epidemic. So in 2021, 10.6 million people fell ill with TB. Out of this number, 4.2 million were undiagnosed or not reported, which means they were medically unaccounted for, and also 1.6 million people died from tuberculosis. And tuberculosis is the leading killer of people living with HIV and the major cause of death related to antimicrobial resistance. So I would also like to add here that tuberculosis is a disease which is rooted in inequalities, and though the vast majority of new cases of tuberculosis disease happen in low and middle income countries all around the world, people and communities who find themselves in the vulnerable situations of poverty, which connects to overcrowded housing, malnutrition, comorbidities, insecurity, oppression, structural racism, exploitation, social deprivation, and marginalization are suffering a disproportionate burden of being exposed to tuberculosis infections, and once infected of developing active tuberculosis disease. And they also have worse perspective and worse health outcomes. I would like to contextualize Global Health Agenda on Tuberculosis Response as a time frame till 2030, which provides a window of opportunity to make change and entry points where I see that probably my research could have a practical value and acceleration of ending tuberculosis epidemic. So ending tuberculosis epidemic by 2030 is among the health targets of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And it's aligned with all the goals, basically most of the goals, not only the target 3, which directly relates to health. And in September 2018, there was the first ever United Nations General Assembly high-level meeting on tuberculosis, which resulted in a political declaration endorsed by the member states, which reinforced their commitments and set the new targets. Global targets to accelerate the progress in ending tuberculosis. And this event was of high importance to keep tuberculosis as a priority for global political agenda. through fostering multi-sectoral accountability and also mobilizing financial resources. In 2020, there was the first progress report on global targets, and 2023 is the next year, and it's an important year again because it would be the second United Nations high-level meeting on tuberculosis, which would serve as the point of head of states, like member states, to report on the progress done. And again, it will be a political agenda and a window of opportunity to mobilize political will. So I'm thinking about Eric's presentation, who was mentioning the lack of political will for many diseases and infectious diseases. So the events like that, they actually serve as a platform to mobilize the global stakeholders' response and political will. And of course, 2030 is time frame for meeting Sustainable Development Goal targets. So if to think about this new commitments taken as a result of United Nations high-level meeting on tuberculosis in 2018, there were new targets related to treatment and diagnostic as well as preventive treatment, but I would like to specifically mention the target on mobilizing sufficient and sustainable financing is the aim to increase in overall global investment for ending tuberculosis with at least $13 billion a year by 2022, and additional $2 billion a year for tuberculosis research. Unfortunately, also related to COVID pandemic, there was a decline in global spending on essential services, and these targets, if we think about 2020 progress reports, they are largely unmet. Like out of the 13 billion, I think it's about half, only half of the financing, and as well the thing for research is also unmet. So basically, my doctoral research will problematize the social space of global health financing for tuberculosis, and it will eliminate its entanglement with global health priority setting, national policies, clinical and public health intervention. And the core research question is why has tuberculosis not attracted the sustained attention of the global community in terms of financial commitments? So the context of forthcoming United Nations high-level meeting on tuberculosis 2023 also relates to the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis and Malaria replenishment cycle for 2023-2025. And in my research, I will study ethnographically the Global Fund replenishment cycle to eliminate the processes of policymaking and financing and their impact on access of affected people to tuberculosis services, as well as their experiences. So just like a couple of words about the Global Fund. So it's one of the dominant initiatives in the global health scene, and it provides 76% of all international financing for tuberculosis, and it operates through this replenishment cycle. So that's why it's very interesting to kind of contextualize the research with the upcoming replenishment. My research draws on several intersecting bodies of literature in anthropology and critical global health studies, including the anthropology of global health and medical humanitarianism, the anthropology of health policy and health system, and the anthropology of philanthropy and investment in global health. So I would like to point out that global health financing has not yet been studied by anthropologists, because if to put it in the words of Susan Erickson, it tends to operate in a secretized social space of elite groups. So Erickson also distinguished that money for tuberculosis responses flows to countries that need it in two ways, through streams of global health funding and also global health financing. And there is a difference between two, which I am very interested and curious to look upon, because global health financing mostly refers to investment initiatives and values power drivers which motivate this financing kind of desire from the private investor and private philanthropist. So that would be interesting to explore. Another point which I would want also to explore is community-led interventions and financing of community-led interventions to providing support for people undergoing tuberculosis treatment. Because by itself, tuberculosis treatment is long, it's very exhausting. It's 6 months and 24 months, depending on the level of resistance, and people need a lot of support to overcome all these hardships. And money invested in community system has always been dismal, so that's also like another area which I want to look at, and to look how community accesses the resources and uses the resources. For methodology, I will conduct a multi-sited ethnographic study that will begin with examining the place of tuberculosis in global health through archival data, literature produced by WHO and other key agencies to chart the historical shifts and transformations in global health policy making, and also drawing on global networks I have built through my prior work. I will conduct ethnographic field visits for in-person, or maybe some of them will be online as well, meetings and interviews with policy and decision makers at the global and country level, donor and technical agencies, private sector philanthropies, civil society organizations, and to be affected communities. Research sites have been distinguished as Canada and the USA, United Nations City in Geneva, and country-level research conducted in Ukraine and or Moldova. So, as for significant and expected contributions of the research, I hope that it will advance understanding of how global health policy making, financing, and funding around tuberculosis is driven, set, administered, and experienced at the local level with a focus on politics and power. Also, historical, cultural, and social perspectives of decisions and knowledge production, experiences of various actors from policymakers to community members. And I believe that my research interest on tuberculosis also links well with three themes of the Dahdaleh Institute on planetary health as it connects to antimicrobial resistance, on global health and humanitarians as a global TB response is rooted in humanitarian action, and most of all it connects to global health for siting, I believe, because it helps to find transdisciplinary, innovative, and equitable solutions to change global tuberculosis response and make it more effective. I would also like to mention that within the Dahdaleh Institute, I'm a member of a social science and health innovation network for tuberculosis, and I'm engaged in its current work on equity, and I'm sure it will contribute to my research topic as well. So my words of appreciation for the support of my research and me through my journey in this academia goes to my dissertation committee, my supervisor of doctoral study, Dr. Margaret MacDonald, who is today here in person in our meeting, Dr. Alexandra Widmer, who joined online, who are faculty members of the Department of Anthropology, and Dr. Amrita Daftari, who is a faculty member of the School of Health Policy and Management at York University. So their expertise in global health policy, anthropology of bureaucracy and documents, and also archival methods in anthropology and qualitative research will support knowledge production and conduction of my research. So I think that's...
And our final presenter for today is Nilanjana Ganguli, and she's going to present under the title Modeling Gender Impacts of Climate Change in the Lake Chilwa Basin of Malawi. Over to you, Nilanjana.
Cool. Let's get those notes out. All right. So my name is Nell, and I am a first-year PhD student at the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change. I've been co-supervised by Martin Bunch and James Urbanski, and my project is currently actually linked to an ongoing Dahdaleh Institute project titled Complex Adaptive Modeling of the Health Impacts of Climate Change in Malawi. So my interest in climate change and health really comes from working in Burkina Faso in mining and also gendered health impacts
and particularly one incident where I was talking to a woman from the artisanal mining camp, and we were talking about, and she's a sex worker, and a question was posed to her to ask why she was doing this work despite all the risks, and her answer was, if I don't, HIV will kill me maybe in a few years, but starvation will kill me in a few weeks. And that is when I decided to leave mining and come back and learn about climate change and health myself before addressing the students. Okay. Before I talk about Malawi, I wanted to spend one slide on climate change and health. So as you all know, climate change threatens not just individual health, but the entire global health system, preying on those who are the most vulnerable and further deepening the existing health inequities around the world. The health impacts of climate change have been known for a while. Academics have been talking about it for at least the last 10 years, if not more. But it's really in the last 5 years and after the pandemic that it has picked up momentum. In fact, last year was the first year that there was a health pavilion at the COP, and we were very excited about it. So why gender? So although climate change impacts all of us in both rich and poor countries, the magnitude and the type of health risk vary by several factors, of which gender is one of the most critical. Climate change impacts women differently than men, mainly due to socioeconomic factors, but also biological differences. Although in some circumstances, men and boys are more vulnerable to climate change, but overall, women are at a disproportionately higher risk to climate change. So some examples of how climate change impacts the health of women. In low-income countries, socioeconomic inequities such as access to resources and normative gender roles and girls make women and girls more vulnerable to climate change than men, mainly through inequality in land rights, low access to expenditure services and loans, reduced mobility, and few alternate livelihood options. So men during droughts have the option to migrate and find alternative livelihood options. Women usually don't. For cultural norms and gender roles. Also, normative gender roles make women the primary caretaker of the household. So basically, they are responsible for cooking food, collecting water, fetching fuel wood, and with a general decline in common pool resources, the time poverty issue with women is being exacerbated. Also, there's more physical labor because of these lack of common food resources, as well as because of these gender roles, women are more exposed to vector-borne diseases of collecting water, washing dishes, cooking food. When displaced by natural disasters, women face a higher risk of violence, sexual abuse, as well as low hygienic facilities, which put them at a higher risk to urogenital diseases, mental illness, as well as sexual abuse, violence. And actually, many studies in Bangladesh are showing that because of sea level rise and seawater intrusion, women, when they're pregnant, when they're drinking highly saline groundwater, they're at more risk of preeclampsia, which is caused by hyper blood tension. As mentioned before, men in certain conditions are also more vulnerable, sometimes are more vulnerable to health impacts of climate change. So in 2016, there were many reports showing a steep rise in suicides in men in Indian male farming communities. Also during floods, men are the ones out there who are trying to rescue others and or doing repair work, which also makes them more vulnerable. So for my master's, I've done a literature review to investigate the current research in gender and climate change And as you can see that since 2015, there has been an increase in these studies. But however, I looked at 4 different subsystems, and there is quite an uneven distribution of gender-focused research, with food security leading this field of study. And there are very, very few articles from communicable diseases and non-communicable. So what are the gaps in climate change and gender research? I found 2 main gaps. I did forget to say that I just started my PhD and my first year. So I haven't even reached comps yet. But I've been thinking about it for a while. So, I have a pretty, I think, understanding of what I'm So the first gap in research is caused by the lack of long-term gender disaggregated data. And the second is due to additional complexity caused by intersections between gender and other social conditions. And this was coined as intersectionality by Kimberly Crenshaw in the 1990s. And because of these complexities still remain underrepresented in the research. And these are the 2 points that I would try to contribute through my research.
You might have to click back on the PowerPoint.
Yeah. So my study location is in a small lake, in the Lake Chilwa Basin, the southeast of Malawi. You can see on the right, this was a drone photo taken in August, and we all were there. You might find James there. So this is a closed lake, which basically means that it's completely and primarily dependent on precipitation levels. And with unpredictable rainfall, the lake has dried at least 8 times in the last century. So you can see why this area is acutely vulnerable to climate change. They also suffer from high population growth, mainly because of promises of bountiful natural resources, maybe in the past, but they are dwindling at the moment. The population of the basin is 1.5 million and spreads across an area of 2,400 square kilometers. Previous research have shown that women are impacted by climate change more than men in this area. So my 3 research questions are: how does gender interact with environmental, economic, and demographic factors to impact the health of women and girls and men and boys in the Lake Chilwa Basin? Secondly, how does climate change influence our interaction? And what are the gender consequences? And thirdly, what are the leverage points to design gender equitable health interventions? So as I've mentioned that women are, I wanted to give some examples of how women are disproportionately higher risk than men. 80% of farming is done by women, and therefore they're more susceptible to income loss during droughts, whereas men can outmigrate and find other alternative livelihood options. Lake Chilwa also has a matrilineal system, which means that property is inherited to the mother's line. And therefore, women tend to stay behind to protect their property, whereas men go out and find other income options. Groundwater salinity is also an emerging issue in the area, and we heard about it quite a bit in August when we were there. And I've mentioned before to women, pregnant women, if they drink saline groundwater, they're at a higher risk of preeclampsia, but also from urinogenital disease. And on the other hand, male fishermen, something I came across through my master's, men are the primary fishermen in Malawi because women are not allowed to go because of superstition. So,
can you repeat that? We didn't hear that.
Men are allowed on boats. They are the primary fishermen. Women only smoke fish, so they're involved in secondary, trades related to like the fishing industry. So, because of superstition, women are not allowed in the boat. So when there are droughts, men spend extended periods of time outside, out in the lake. And so they have very low hygiene. So they live in these small shacks called Zimbaweras. But additionally, when there are cholera vaccination campaigns, which usually on the lakeshore, they don't come back because they think they need to spend that extended periods of time collecting fishing in the lake because there are no fishes. In that way, it's like almost like a double, they face double risk than women who are on the lake shores, who attend vaccination campaigns and they have better hygiene facilities. This is not proven yet, but this is my hypothesis. So for my theoretical frameworks, I have decided on 4. So I'll start with complex adaptive theory, which is a systems thinking framework which helps tackling multiple nonlinear interactions between factors, variables, or agents. This is important as my research will look at both environmental and socioeconomic factors, variables from different systems such as food, water, communicable disease, infectious disease, and extreme weather. Second, intersectionality. I mentioned it briefly before. This was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the 1990s. And it really enables to understand how race, gender, disability, sexuality, class, age all intersect with each other to form new or unpredictable vulnerabilities amongst them. And thirdly, critical systems theory is an emancipatory systems approach employing multiple methods that can be used coherently to intervene in complex societal problem situations. So since my research applies a gender lens to study health impacts, I thought it would be important to also to bring in frameworks that can tackle power differentials between stakeholders. So complex adaptive systems was just not enough to look at these different factors. And finally, participatory action research is mainly for the methodology, so that power is decentered from the researcher and there is equal benefit gained by the researcher as well as the communities from this research. Have to do those outputs. Too many screens, I'm confused. So for my methodology, I would like to collect primary data using community participatory methods as well as soft systems methodology. Soft systems methodology just offers tools through which you can visualize these correlations in a messy problem in a very complex system. For analysis, I would love to do group modeling where you are asking communities questions and they're giving you answers, and with those answers, you're creating a model while they're there, and they keep giving you feedback, and you keep adapting that model until they say, yes, this is how it should be represented. And agent-based modeling, I'll share another slide for that. So my outputs so far come up with our gender indicators for the Dahdaleh Institute project, a report both in English and Chichewa, which is the local language in Malawi, hopefully a dissertation, and some infographics, which I'd like to leave with the community for their future awareness programs. So I'll skip this quickly. Agent-based modeling, this is a challenge that I've given myself. I, at the moment, know very little about quantitative modeling. So this is something that I have been getting a lot of input from Dr. Ali Asghari. So agent-based modeling is a computational method to investigate the behavior of complex systems by simulating both interactions between components within the system and with their external social and physical environments. So this is a bottom-up approach that does not impose predetermined algorithmic behavior in a system, but rather allows patterns to emerge from interactions among so-called agents and their environment. So the next steps, I've just curated my program plan. These are my two comps. The first will be mainly theory, where I'll be looking at systems thinking, intersectionality, and doing a deep dive with gendered health impacts of climate change. And the second will be to build a toolbox of methodology that are being used, systems methodology and community-based participatory research methodology in international development. So I wanted to take this opportunity. I don't know, Teresa's not here, but I'll be quick. Oh, okay. Thank Dahdaleh Institute.
She's on camera.
Oh,
there you go. Especially James, Martin, Idil, BK, Muhammad Ali, Teresa, Shana, Chloe, and Samia, and the entire Malawi project team and Synergy with Planetary Health Research. This year has been busy, and I'm pretty proud of the accomplishments that I've made, and hopefully I'll be able to keep that tempo the next 4 years or so. And lastly, I've heard from many graduate students within the Institute and outside the Institute about academic life being extremely lonely. So how about we build a Dahdaleh graduate student? I have the blessings of Teresa and hopefully your approval. So I'll reach out to all of you next year and maybe you can come up with something cool. There won't be any presentations, that's for sure.
There'll be a lot of various forms of enrichment, I'm sure.
Hiking.
Including beer and stuff.
Well, thank you for listening. And
Well, that's great. That's fantastic. I just encourage people to ask questions or engage in discussion, either from people online, or also people here in the room. Anyone online, just raise your hand with the little raise your hand thingy at the bottom of the screen. And anyone in the room, just do the same, but raise your actual hand. That would be really nice. I have just a wealth of questions swimming through my mind, and I would just like to probably the most important one that I just want to keep encouraging people. You know, this research really matters, and you can see not only in your own research but in listening to what other people are working on. The areas of focus that people have chosen, these are really, really critical priority areas in global health. And the orientation, which really impressed me today, the orientation that people have adopted is, in fact, a critical problem-solving approach. And that approach is, from, for example, from Hillary's perspective, at this stage, right? And I don't want to sort of push you in any way, but it's very much about illuminating. Illuminate, in the first instance, the critical aspect of critical problem solving is to illuminate. So to critical perspective means understanding the full dimension of it, and not leaping, to an answer through a particular methodology without a proper question, right? So in order to get to a good question, you need to illuminate the problem, and you need to feel, as well as intellectually realize that complexity. And you need to feel and then feel comfortable with the insight that comes from that illumination. And that's really a critical step in the graduate student process. And it's very obvious to me from the presentations that people have done, either and at various stages, that is deeply valued by their faculty and by the support that they're getting in terms of how people are approaching their particular problem. And so I just want to emphasize how important the critical aspect is, the illumination of the problem before we lead to questions and then applied methods and then answers. The worst thing that we want is to be an answer in search of a meaningful question, right? So we want actually the opposite. We want first a meaningful question, which comes through illumination and looking, seeking, trying to understand, going under every nook and cranny of a particular problem, as you put it, Ilana, to problematize. This is a really, really important step. And both Hillary and Ilana, both of your presentations, I felt very much emphasized that. Obviously different areas, but I was really pleased and really, I thought, wow, this is fantastic. These guys are really doing this the right way. So the first step is always to eliminate. And then the next step is problem solving. Right? So what have we illuminated? And how do we then seek to solve a particular problem? Well, that requires a good question. And what is that emerges from the illumination What was really obvious, for example, in Eric's presentation, was that very clearly there's been a great deal of illumination, a great deal of inquiry, to really trying to understand what is HPV, what is a vaccine, what is a policy, how does this affect a very particular nation, a very particular community, and very particular context, urban versus rural, for example. What is the policy process? How does that work? Is it simply a matter of declaration, or is it also a matter of declaration, but also resources and capacity to actually implement? You very clearly have thought that through, and then you've come to a particular question and a particular set of questions, the answer to which will have meaning, a very practical meaning in Ghana. So that very much struck me about your work, Eric. And I thought the simple questions that you presented and the simple findings that you presented, these are very, very profound and very important in terms of actually potentially directing approaches to improving HPV vaccination in Ghana specifically, but also generally outside of that particular country. The challenges that you illuminated for Ghana are, at least in my observation, are ubiquitous challenges and are not unique to Ghana. So I thought your approach there and your problem-solving approach to careful questioning was fantastic. And then we come to critical problem solving a particular problem is really about the specific, right? It's about actually operationally defining very particular issues to the best that an operational definitional process can do, and then designing through that process of elimination, question formulation, and then operational definition of very specific elements of a problem. One comes to the point where you can identify specific interventions. And so for Nell, your work, what again struck me very, very clearly was you're just moving right along that pathway. And you're at various stages, obviously, but you're really moving in terms of actual adaptation interventions that can be community-based, can be government-based, that can be supported by other actors and so on. So that idea of critical problem solving is a core idea that is in florid evidence in the four presentations that we had. And so I'd just like to just congratulate each of you. Like this is great work, and it's exactly what a university should be supporting, and it's exactly what we're trying to do here at the Institute, take a transdisciplinary perspective and approach to complex global health challenges. And so those are I have, for each of you, I have a list of questions, but I won't even begin. But I will ask Godfred, who's raised his hand, and then Mary, who's also raised her hand, after Godfred, to either ask a question or to comment. Over to you, Godfred.
Yeah. So I did like to thank the graduate students for their incredible work. I think it's exciting to see the kind of research they are pursuing and various lenses that they are applying, especially the critical lens. As they presented, I picked up a few questions for three of the presenters. And so I would lay them out. Number one, Eric, Asempah, you did present on your work on Ghana, and especially you did indicate at the end that you do see rising cases of HPV and the fact that there are no vaccinations in the country. I wondered if you had thought of what the policy implications are, and two, what practical interventions could be put in place to deal with these rising cases? I know you did talk a bit about it, probably at the university level, but if you could throw more light on it. And number two, Hilary, I like your work on water sanitation and hygiene. That is a part of my work. But I also wondered that beyond the political ecology perspective that you bring, that encompasses also you examining probably the biological component. I was wondering if you had thought of probably further on in your PhD assessing the physical as well as sometimes the biological composition of the water that is being used in that country. And number three, that goes to the last speaker. I thought you approved the gendered health impacts of climate change in Malawi. Is quite interesting. And looking at the approach you are using, I feel like it is quite informative, especially your intention to look at intersectionality. And this is more of a comment. I wondered if you had also considered the possibility of looking at the theory of syndemics that could be blended in with intersectionality so that you are not only looking at probably other social conditions, you may also draw in some other biological factors that may be influencing it. But more especially, I thought the agent-based modeling approach would be an appropriate approach. And as you go further, I did like to discuss more about your work, but those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mary, do you want to offer comments or questions, and then we'll ask the presenters to reply.
Sure. Thank you, James. I'd like to also thank all of the graduate students who presented really extraordinarily excellent projects in progress, and so wonderful to see them. I have two questions. So I'll start with Eric. So thank you for that presentation. And I know your work is part of more of a comparative analysis as well, looking at Canada, Rwanda, and Ghana. And so particularly in Rwanda, they've partnered with the Gavi Fund that funds vaccines in Africa and other low and middle income countries. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the opportunities there for Ghana to work with the Gavi Fund and what your thoughts are. And so maybe that's a little bit of an overlap with Godfred's question. And then for Yuliya, I found your presentation on TB and the global target set and so on really, really fascinating. And I'm just wondering if you're planning to look at various policy areas and whether you're looking specifically at around accountability at the national level and how you would plan to look at that. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And Roger has some comments and questions, so I'll ask you, and then we'll ask each person to respond accordingly. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say much. I just wanted to apologize because I have to leave right after I speak because I have to go somewhere else. I'll see you early in January. But I have to catch a flight and a typical academic institute. But what I wanted to say is that I really enjoyed this a great deal, but it poses a question, generally, all four cases. And you all expressed it in very different terms, theoretically, but also materially in different terms. The body, quality, material, a variety of different ways of approaching the material world in which your cases are located. And there is a temptation always to approach that material world in technical material terms. That's what people do. Because if there's a problem, and James raised the idea of critical problem solving. If there is a problem, there are issues, there are things that we need to deal with. We deal with them. Right? So with the fire, you put out the fire. You know, that's like almost mechanical the way we respond to this. And the problem is that sets a particular that sets us on a course. So that the choices we make will predetermine and foreclose various options that we have later. And as a political scientist, I don't have any medical approach to this or public health approach to this, but 3 years ago today, I gave a talk in Melbourne, actually it was on sabbatical, about the potential of an oncoming pandemic before anybody knew anything. And I was surprised 2 weeks later that there was a pandemic, and we've been dealing with this. And as this opened, and James knows that, everybody who I've worked with, is that during that early time, 3 years ago and 2.5 years ago, when we opened up, we thought that there was that material set of circumstances that we had encountered with a pandemic, the questions that we now were posing opened up in a way that it hadn't been before, and we were looking for solutions that were not in the medical, not in the technical, and not in the mechanical ways of doing things, but we had to ask different kinds of questions about power, about gender, about race. In particular, in May of 2020, we started to think globally about, Black Lives Matter and all of it. So the questions were opened up. As soon as the vaccines offered themselves, again, as a mechanical, technical solution, many of those other questions began to be shut down again. The vaccine was offered as a solution to everything, not a critical problem-solving type of solution, but something that was convenient, something that could easily be organized. 1, 2, 3, 4 boosters, where you can call people. You have people in a data bank, and you can give them passports. I'm vaccinated. I can get onto an airplane or into a bar, or I can travel. Those kinds of things. And many of those other questions that were raised along the way were then shut down again, not because there was evil intent, but just because of the convenience of trusting in the mechanical, technical solution of things. And I think there is, in all 4 of your cases, there are different ways of keeping that other world alive. And I think it's really important one maintains that, because the challenge not to fall into the solutionism of technicalities, that temptation is always incredibly high in everything we do. So that's my lesson, in a way, having benefited from these very, inspiring talks. But it's something I take with me. The fourth year of the pandemic begins. That's my work. I'm not dealing with the cases that you're working on. But as we're moving forward, we need to keep that other world alive and think about gender and power and race and class and social inequalities and the particular effects we need to think about that those factors might be having on the technical solutions that we have to find, right? So anything else? Apologies for having to run off, and I wish you a happy New Year and happy holidays and a great celebration.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's a great way for you to leave us.
Very verbal check. Sorry.
See you in the New Year.
Hillary.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I forgot my academic etiquette. Roger's my supervisor. So.
I'll see you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go around, and maybe Eric, would like to.
Yeah. All right.
Sorry, Maggie, did you want to? First,
Maggie's there.
where are you?
Sir, I'll move back.
No, there's plenty of comments already for us,
Okay, good.
and little time.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. And also, I would want to thank Mary very much. She is my supervisor, and she's been very supportive in this particular project. So I'm very grateful for all the support thus far. Regarding Mary's question on Gavi, why Gavi, what the role of Gavi in Ghana's case, Ghana does qualify to access support from Gavi, and in 2013, there was a pilot project for HPV vaccination in 4 districts in Ghana. However, there is no report, nothing, nobody knows where this work really went to. So we don't know whether Ghana still is in any talk with Gavi, whether to resurrect that conversation. But Ghana does have that space. And also there is a pre-qualification to access Gavi funding. So, and there's a threshold with GDP. So if Ghana tends to move outside that threshold, it's most likely that it's not going to get funding from Gavi. So that information, as at present, I do not really know whether Ghana still qualifies to access Gavi funding or not. And with regards to Godfrey's question on Godfrey asked 2 questions on policy implication and then practical interventions that currently can be in place. In terms of practical intervention, I think there has to be a form of education. There has to be increasing public education on cervical cancer. That could be a way of intervention. The reason that could be a way of intervention is people with increasing knowledge, there is more psychologically, it creates a preventative modality in the minds of people. And also there has to be community-based conversation as well. The chiefs in Ghana tend to have greater authority, so there could be some form of conversation around that area. Ghana is a very community-centered society, so conversation can actually be channeled through the community leaders. So that is also another practical way of intervention. And then the health centers as well could also be a space that could be used to create intervention through education. So that is also another approach. And I'm also looking at the fact that there could be some kind of conversation with donor agencies. Rwanda has done the same, and Rwanda has been able to receive free vaccines from Merck to be able to initiate or start its HPV vaccination project. So Ghana can actually do that, and that could be a way to start their vaccination program. When it comes to policy implication, to have a policy and not to have a policy by itself is a policy. So Ghana not technically having an HPV vaccination in itself is a policy. The implication is increasing cases of cervical cancer. So that is one major implication, and this is going to continue. So I would see that as a major policy implication for not having a specific, a policy for HPV. The thing is, it's not that Ghana doesn't have a policy at all. It does have a policy on cervical cancer, which is embedded in a bigger policy document. So there is a need to have a specific approach to deal with cervical cancer, like it does have for breast cancer. That way, they know what they need to do. So that is, the best I think I can respond. I can give as at now. Maybe later on, if there is a better way to respond to your question, we can continue this conversation from there.
Thank you. Thank you. Hillary, did you want to offer some comments on the questions? Or?
Yeah, very, very quickly. This is about how I'm going to think about quality later in my work, and Godfrey, you've touched on exactly my problem. So I'm in my second comprehensive now, and I had a really great conversation with my committee around the work I presented. And when I was doing my first comprehensive, I was thinking about quality in many different ways. So quality in terms of its biophysical manifestation, but also in terms of its social quality. So how polluted water makes social distinction and social relations. But I'm going to need to be more specific. And my second comprehensive is all about the production of water quality. So this is in the actual process of creating clean water, as we would understand as potable water. So for me, I think I will end up defining water quality in terms of drinking water and in terms of potable water. But I think understanding quality in its biophysical manifestation, but also in its social interpretations is really important. There's some really interesting literature on the ontological politics of water in indigenous communities and how water's quality isn't necessarily just about its biophysical giver of health, but also its relationship to broader ecosystems and non-human natures. So I don't want to lose that in my approach to understanding water, but I think in terms of the production of health in a city, I'm going to have to think about its biophysical parameters.
Okay, thank you. Yuliya, do you want to offer some comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mary, for your remark about accountability. It's extremely important. Actually, I've been involved in the multi-sectoral accountability work in 5 countries in the ECA region for the past 2 years. And there is a specific instrument, specific tool developed by WHO on inquiry on the member states exactly after United Nations high-level meeting on tuberculosis, is to develop multi-sectoral accountability framework and to kind of mobilize and strengthen addressing social determinants of tuberculosis and implement interventions beyond biomedical. I would say, because I was engaged with piloting this multi-sectoral accountability assessment, it's been a very tough process because it means that you kind of go beyond the healthcare sector and you ask other sectors to be accountable, which they not necessarily understand as their major priority. But like now thinking about your question, I would also think that I should probably bring into my research more focus on also soliciting feedback from the members of parliament at the country level, because all this UN kind of declarations, this is a soft power, right? It's not basically bounding for countries to implement it. It's more like reputational aspects. But also, like yesterday I was in this presentation by Akim Steiner, is the head of UNDP, and actually I also asked him how he finds this accountability to progress on SDGs. And yeah, I got inspired from him as well, because he says it's more like about lawmakers and the parliamentary scrutiny to focus these actions on the country level. I was not thinking about it before you asked as how to implement my research, but as parliamentarians are voting for budgets and my research is about money flow, I think it would be important focus.
Thank you. And Nell?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Godfred. I will reach out to you to learn more about your suggestions. But I wanted to actually comment on Roger's comment. And it is important as early career researchers to not sway from the real purpose why we're here. And that's something that I've been grappling with. I find academia to be extremely individualistic. So to keep our research geared towards collective action is something that I am grappling with all our deliverables and goals and working alone, hence the Graduate Club. But I think having good mentors, but having that humble attitude to every single conversation that you get into, where that keeping that attitude that there's something to learn from everyone, whether they're mentors, whether they're undergraduate students. And that sort of keeps our mind open and flexible to other forms of knowledge, not just academic knowledge, because we've all come with experiences that have brought us here, that have led us to this point. Having great mentors like James and Martin and Ali and Adil always help. So stay flexible and stay cool.
Well, so I'm just going to wrap up. We're a little bit over time, but that's okay. I just want to say thank you to Eric, to Hillary, to Yuliya, and to Nell, of course. You've done a great job today presenting really, really big and complex ideas, and congratulations. It's really inspiring to me. It just, again, as I said, there's nothing more gratifying as a professor, inspiring than to be with graduate students who are truly, truly committed to curiosity, to discipline, self-discipline, and the application of all of to actually improve the world. And that's kind of, not kind of, that is the purpose. That's why we're here. So I'm just delighted, having listened to the 4 presentations. And I want to thank especially Teresa. Where are you, Teresa?
She's hiding.
Teresa just does a wonderful job throughout the year on so many fronts, but most especially relevant to today's seminar, to support graduate students. And each of you know very well how meticulous and thorough Teresa is, and how genuinely supportive. And I really want to thank you, Teresa, for that. And also thank everyone who joined us online, and also Armando for technical support, organizing the aspects of the seminar today. Thank you for that. I look forward to seeing everybody in the new year. There's 2 things I want to say, just to remind all the grad students. Now that we're back formally, and we will be moving from hybrid to hopefully actual physical presence at the university, I just remind people, because a lot of people are new, there is dedicated office space here for you as graduate students, and you are free to be here and to work here as scholars of the Institute. It's a nice space, and it's a serious space, and it's a quiet space for that solitary work, and it's a space where you will find community. That is really what we tried to do in the way we designed it physically, so you're welcome. Remember that. And then I'll just take this opportunity to anoint Nell as the new matriarch of the Dahdaleh Graduate Student Club, and I think that's great. So off you go, do that.
Lots of bicep curls.
And you will find Mary and I will talk about this, but we'll figure out a way to offer some support for that, some whatever financial support. Won't be a big deal, but you'll be able to enrich yourselves.
Mini bar.
And then with that, I'll just remind everyone, our first graduate seminar of the new year is Wednesday, January 11th. And Harvey Skinner, who's the former dean, founding dean, actually, the Faculty of Health here at York, and also former dean at the University of Toronto and Public Health Sciences, and at the Law School of Public Health. He will be offering our first seminar, and it's entitled Healing Ourselves, Healing Others, Healing Ourselves. For a new world. Well, go online, check the title, and check the description. And then I'll just remind everyone that participating in the graduate seminars is an invitation, and it's as a graduate scholar here at the institution, invitation and an expectation. So we look forward to seeing you at all of the seminars. And then finally, just want to wish you all a happy holiday, and let's go to the party.